We are alone. We're completely alone. We're the only human species left out of the more than 20 that once roamed the earth. The closest relatives, the Neanderthals, did not make it either. And their extinction has been one of the big questions of paleoanthropology, and now we are closer to finding an answer. And the answer might surprise you. Meet Thorin. Thorin is one of the last Neanderthals to walk the planet, and he was part of a previously unknown lineage that was isolated for about 50,000 years. He was discovered in 2015 at the entrance to Grotte Matron, a rock shelter in the Rhône River Valley in southern France, and as you probably noticed, he got nicknamed after a dwarf from Tolkien's The Hobbit. He might have lived as recently as 42,000 years ago, close to when our human relatives disappeared. Neanderthals in the Rhone Valley were distinct from those in nearby regions based on differences we can notice in the stone tools at Grotte Matron. So it appears that Thorin and his companions did not really adopt the new tool making style that was seen at other contemporary sites. And this is important because it supports the hypothesis that Neanderthals lived in small, socially isolated groups and struggled to keep their numbers viable. While it is commonly assumed that humans were responsible in one way or another for the extinction of the Neanderthals, the causes would have been a little more complicated than that, having to do with genetic and cultural isolation seen at places such as Grotte Matron. But there are even more recent sites where evidence of their existence vanishes around 28,000 years ago. Fossil evidence shows that toward the end, there were a few who were still clinging to survival in places like Gibraltar, where we have a cave called Goram, where there are many meters of sediment layers, and each layer depicts a different point in geological time. And fossil remains were discovered in these layers, suggesting that they occupied the cave for a very long time, actually for more than 100,000 years. So Neanderthals might have clung on in the region until as recently as 24 to 30,000 years ago, according to the dating of one of the layers, and this would place the region as one of the last places Neanderthals lived. They might have also spread in the coastal area, but other fossil evidence would have been submerged by now. What is absolutely fascinating about this cave is that they also discovered the remains of about 150 different types of birds, and they didn't necessarily eat everything they were hunting because, among other things, they were also hunting birds of prey. And what was also found is that the cut marks on the wing bones, they were on places with very little flesh, so that seems to mean that they were catching the birds in order to strip them of their feathers. So for decorative purposes, really, because if you remove the bird's body tissue, what you are left with is a decorative cape extending the length of the wingspan. So if you think about it, they might have even wrapped this around their shoulders, which would have been a sight to behold. So this means that very much like us, they would have been able, at least to a certain extent, to understand and appreciate cultural symbols in a way. There are also some interesting engravings that might classify as art. We have deep grooves requiring 60 strokes of a stone tool, a sharp one. It's clear that it was something done intentionally. And we also have examples now of decorative shells and also the use of red ochre pigment at many Neanderthal sites, pointing to the possibility that they did use their environment for artistic purposes. So the fact that they used many different tools and they also displayed a certain capacity to live in a little more abstract way, not just surviving, reveals that they were in a way quite similar to us. We even have some cave paintings from three different sites in Spain, older than 64,000 years ago. I think the oldest dated cave paintings in the world, and they seem to predate the arrival of modern humans in Europe by at least 20,000 years, which would suggest that they are likely to be of Neanderthal origin. So we have red and black paintings, we have representations of different animals, linear signs, such as in the cave of La Pasiega in Cantabria, geometric shapes, hand stencils, like in Maltravieso in Extremadura, and handprints or speleothems in Ardales in Andalusia. So they were basically painting the stalagmites, painting the environment they used to reside in. Now, the hypothesis about the extinction of Neanderthals revolved around a demise due to demographic decline, environmental change, competition with Homo sapiens, and genetic assimilation. So, the demographic argument suggested that the extinction of Neanderthals might have been driven by the small size and isolation of the populations, which would have led to interbreeding, depression, reduced population growth rates, difficulties in finding mates, stochastic fluctuations in birth rates, death rates, and sex ratios. So, as a result, the population basically declined below the minimum viable population threshold, even without the influence of modern humans. The environment based hypothesis postulates that the Neanderthal metapopulation might not have survived due to large scale climatic fluctuations across Europe, catastrophic climatic change, or new diseases and pathogens introduced by Homo sapiens. And then we have the competition hypothesis, focusing on the competition between modern humans and Neanderthals for space and resources, and how sapiens might have had advantages due to, for example, better hunting strategies, better tools, superior cognitive abilities, and a more solid and larger social structure. However, the latest evidence actually points out that small scale Homo sapiens immigrations into Neanderthal populations, providing recurrent gene mixing, could have led to almost complete genetic substitution over about 10,000 to 30,000 years. The latest study is actually a mathematical model. It is grounded in neutral species drift, which doesn't require selective advantage or some catastrophic event, but shows that sustained gene flow from a demographically larger species could account for Neanderthals' genetic absorption into modern humans within a time frame which is actually consistent with the archaeological evidence as well. This also aligns with growing evidence of interbreeding and genetic introgression through recurrent Homo sapiens immigration waves, explaining patterns of Neanderthal ancestry in present day Eurasian populations. Now, this is not to say that other factors did not play a part in the story, but genetic admixture is likely the key to their disappearance. Interbreeding led to a substantial gene flow between Neanderthals and modern humans, and nowadays, modern humans still retain a, let's say, considerable amount of Neanderthal genetic material, about 2%, in some population groups, even 4%. So, our species expanded in Eurasia about 60,000 to 70,000 years ago, giving rise to all present day non African populations. But we also have earlier episodes of sapiens presence in Eurasia, in particular in the area of the Levant, over 100,000 years ago. And now it is believed that this involved lineages that ultimately became extinct. However, recent genomic studies also revealed that these early groups as well likely engaged in admixture with Neanderthals. The recent analysis comparing present human genomes with available Neanderthal ones have provided evidence of admixture as early as 200,000 years ago. So this means that sapiens migrated into some of the Neanderthal settlements on multiple occasions, and we got busy with them. We had interbreeding events, and although some of them stem from now extinct lineages, they might have initiated a long-term process of genetic exchange later, very much amplified during our main expansion out of Africa. So, repeated waves of sapiens moved into Neanderthal groups and acted as recurring genetic disturbances. The new study treats the incoming human populations as effectively infinite, following a model called the continent island model, which mirrors the long span of modern human dispersal. This is not to say that we were infinite, but almost all the estimates point out to our populations being much larger than those of the Neanderthals. Modern human estimates in the late Pleistocene run from a few thousands to hundreds of thousands or even more, whereas Neanderthal numbers likely only a few thousand. So the stark disparity justifies modeling modern humans as this vast demographic source, sending multiple immigration pulses into these much smaller communities, gradually diluting their genetic identity. These populations can exchange individuals with their surroundings, acting as a genetic bath, and the ensemble structure yields both the overall genetic trajectory of Neanderthals and the statistical fluctuations experienced by individual subpopulations. The model further assumes that Neanderthals themselves formed a network of small interacting groups consistent with viewing them as a sort of meta population. So the exact size of the groups remains uncertain, but the evidence, it all points out into the direction that they did live at very low densities. So the novelty here is not the interbreeding, that's well known and well supported, but showing how small and repeated genetic immigration events might explain the levels of Neanderthal ancestry found in living human populations. The framework assumes neutral drift, so no specific advantages from either species, and within the setup, the results offer a mechanism for understanding Neanderthal disappearance, which can be summed up in two words: genetic dilution. So, very simply put, modern humans occasionally send a few individuals into a Neanderthal village, and then these newcomers have children with the Neanderthals. And after some time, the mixed population settles into a stable blend of Neanderthal genes and modern human genes. And then you have a next wave of human immigrants arriving, and that blend shifts again. And even very small and infrequent pulses of modern human newcomers, let's say just a handful of individuals every few decades, gradually dilute the Neanderthal genes. Because Neanderthal communities are tiny, each of these pulses has a very profound effect on the population. So, over thousands of years, the accumulation of these small nudges can almost entirely replace the genetic signatures with modern human ones. This doesn't rule out other influences either. We do have documented environmental shifts, and ecological competition would have still been an important factor, and all of them shaped Neanderthal history. But it is to say that the long record of interaction between Neanderthals and us suggests that their decline was likely the outcome of this very slow process of assimilation. If you think of it, the total amount of Neanderthal DNA nowadays is actually larger than when they were alive, which is something very wild to think about. In a way, they kind of still live through us. So that was it for today. I hope you found it informative and inspiring. It's always fun to talk about the history of our species and of other species. I'm really hoping to make more videos about prehistory in the future. If you enjoy my history project, consider subscribing or becoming a member. This was Irina. Thank you so much for watching. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.